first silver quarter hit the laminate counter with a sharp clink, sliding exactly 2 inches before coming to a dead stop. Walter Cobb didn't chase it. He simply watched it settle with a practiced, patient gaze, then reached back into his heavy coat pocket for the next one. The pharmacy on Clover Street in Harlan, Kentucky, was thick with the sensory markers of a Thursday afternoon. It smelled of antiseptic, industrial floor wax, and that specific heavy quiet that tends to collect in small-town stores during the lull between 2 and 3 o'clock. Overhead, the fluorescent lights hummed a low, electric buzz. Somewhere in the cluttered workspace behind the counter, a radio played a country station that sounded as though it hadn't been tuned or changed since 1994. Total for Walter's prescription was $14.75. He had the money, he always had the money, he just needed a moment to count it out. Sir. Donna's voice cut through the hum. It wasn't unkind, but it was flat. The sound of a woman who had exhausted her daily supply of patience long before the noon hour. Do you have a card? It might be faster. Walter looked up, his brown eyes steady and unblinking. No card, he said softly. Sorry. He returned to the task at hand. His hands, both of them, moved with a rhythmic, frustrating autonomy. It was a fine, persistent tremor that originated somewhere deep in his wrists and radiated outward to the tips of his fingers. It wasn't violent, but it was constant. Over the decades, he had developed a system to manage it. Pin the coin firmly between 2 fingers and the thumb. Apply precise pressure, and transfer it with agonizing slowness. He was good at it, but he was undeniably slow. Is there a problem? A new voice asked. Greg, the manager, appeared with the suddenness common to his profession. He was young, perhaps 30, wearing a khaki vest and a name tag that announced his authority in block letters. He wasn't hostile, but his eyes were sharp. He had been watching from the periphery. No problem, Walter replied quietly, never looking up from the coins. Behind him, the line was growing restless. Ray Hutchins, a man in work boots, shifted his weight with a heavy thud. On the counter, Ray's intended purchase, a box of ibuprofen and a package of Ace Bandagesic waiting. Break time equals 1.1. Ray let out a long exhale through his nose. The kind of breath that tries to mask a sigh but fails entirely. Come on, buddy, Ray muttered under his breath, though it was loud enough for the small room to hear. Walter didn't respond. For one brief second, as he turned his right palm up to retrieve the next set of quarters, he stared at his own hand as if it were a foreign object, a piece of machinery that belonged to someone else. Then he closed his fingers, gripped the coins, and placed them one by one on the counter. $14.75. Exact. Thank you, Walter said. Donna swept the money away without making eye contact, already reaching for the white paper prescription bag. Have a good day, she said, the words a rote formality. Walter nodded and began his slow trek toward the door. The unseen story. This isn't a story about the common rudeness of a retail line, nor is it a plea for sympathy for an elderly man from a tired cashier. It isn't even truly about what happened in that pharmacy in Harlan. This is a story about what those shaking hands had done a lifetime ago in a place most people in that pharmacy couldn't find on a map. It is about the history carried in the marrow that no one bothered to ask about. We have all seen men like Walter. We have stood them, checked our watches, and shifted our weight with varying degrees of decency. Walter Cobb lived a life defined by quiet, fixed points. He had occupied the same two-room, second-floor apartment on Merchant Street for 11 years. He liked his east-facing window for the morning light, and had long ago made peace with the radiator that clanked twice every night at 2 a.m. His life was organized on a single shelf, a library book, a photo of his late wife, a joke coffee mug from his daughter, and a plain shoebox. He never opened the shoebox. He knew exactly what was inside, but the contents weren't going anywhere. They had been there for decades, and he expected they would eventually be tossed into the trash by whoever cleared out his apartment after he was gone. He was more than fine with that. He preferred it. Every Thursday, his routine was a ritual. He would walk to the pharmacia, 23-minute trip at his pace. He enjoyed the walk because he never lost the simple, profound appreciation for walking on flat ground, on pavement, in a place where nothing was trying to kill him. That feeling had persisted for 54 years. Walter carried a settled weight, the quiet of a man who had already finished his grieving and had nothing left to prove. His daughter, Carol, called from Cincinnati every Sunday. She worried in the way adult children do, offering him a place to live. But Walter always changed the subject. He never talked about his hands, and he certainly never talked about the war. Even when Carol was younger and asked, he simply said, "Nothing to tell." They lived within that gap of silence. The only physical remnant he carried daily, besides the tremor, was a silver St. Christopher medal on his keychain. He hadn't driven in 8 years, but he'd carried that medal through 312 days in country, and he wasn't about to stop now. St. Christopher was the patron saint of travelers, and Walter figured that was close enough for him. Break time equals 1.1s. The hillside in Thuathian. What the people in the pharmacy saw was a slow old man. What they didn't know was that in the summer of 1970, Walter Cobb was a 22-year-old staff sergeant standing on a hilltop in Thu Thien Province, Vietnam, at a place called Fire Base Ripcord. While the rest of the world was focused on Woodstock or the moon landing, 63 men of the 101st Airborne were dying on a mountain that didn't make the news. Ripcord was a jagged patch of jungle surrounded by North Vietnamese Army regulars who had the base zeroed in. Supply lines were cut, and the shelling was relentless. On the night of July 16, 4 rounds of mortar fire hit the base in 20 seconds. The final round struck the supply bunker on the east perimeter. Walter was only 30 feet away. When the smoke cleared, the bunker was a ruin of burning ammunition and fuel. Walter heard voices inside specifically. He heard Dennis Fay, a 19-year-old kid from Ohio who had just been showing him a photo of his girlfriend, Patrice. Walter went into that inferno 3 times. He pulled out 4 men. He went back a 4th time, searching for Dennis. Even as the structure began to collapse, he had to be dragged away by members of his unit. His palms were lacerated and filled with fragmentation material. He had 2nd-degree burns and a concussion. He was back on duty 11 days later. For this, he was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the Army's 2nd highest decoration for valor. He put the medal in a shoebox and never spoke of it again. The trembling started 15 years later. The VA doctors told him the fragmentation in his palms was too close to the nerves to remove safely. The shrapnel would stay, and the shake would get worse. The clipping on the counter, Walter, was halfway down the block when Donna found the paper. It had slipped under the lip of the counter, face down and folded into quarters. It was a photocopy of a newspaper clipping from the Harlan Daily Enterprise, dated June 1971. The headline read, "Local Soldier Awarded Distinguished Service Cross." Donna looked at the photograph of a young, thin-faced man in uniform, his eyes not quite meeting the camera. She read the citation describing a soldier who ignored orders to stop, returning to a burning bunker under mortar fire to save his comrades. It described the bilateral hand injuries from fragmentation. Donna set the paper down and looked at the coins. She thought about the 4 minutes and 30 seconds she had spent feeling impatient while a man with shrapnel in his hands counted out change for his medicine. She called Greg over. They both stood in silence, looking out the glass door toward the street, where Walter had disappeared. The trembling wasn't age. Time equals 1.1. It was July 16, 1970. It was a kid from Dayton who never came home. It was 54 years of carrying something in his palms that could never be removed. Walter reached home at 3:20 p.m. He made his coffee and stood at his window. He didn't even know he had lost the clipping. He had 3 more just like it in his pocket. He carried them not for pride, but as proof that Dennis Fay was real, that the bunker was real, and that his life wasn't just a long, specific dream. He sat down to read his library book as the evening settled over Merchant Street. Quiet and ordinary. 3 blocks away, Donna left the photocopy by the register. She didn't know what to do with it, but she knew he couldn't throw it away. Walter Cobb's hands shook at 3/10 of an inch, and they would shake for the rest of his life. He never asked for understanding. He simply moved through the world with his settled weight, a man who had learned that some things are too heavy to ever put down.